Miss Kathleen, are you here with us? Make sure she's ready.
I am here.
There
Hi.
she is. Hi, Miss Kathleen. Okay, let me go ahead and read you some background on our wonderful speaker tonight. Hi, everyone. I'm Beverly. I'll be your TAMIT host this evening. Thank you for coming to our third edition of TAMIT, monthly conversations with members just like you who are passionate about a topic related to addiction. All hosted by the Addicts Mom, a peer support community group that supports sharing without shame. Tonight, we are so pleased to welcome with us Kathleen Cochran. Kathleen is the mother of 3 adult children and has been married for 32 years. She has also been a member of TAM since its early days. Her journey with her middle child, Molly, has spanned over 15 years through multiple rehabs, sober living homes, IOPs, as well as several near-death overdoses. About 5 years ago, Kathleen found her way to a more harm reduction approach and has never looked back. Her daughter Molly has been in recovery from a very serious opioid use disorder with fentanyl for about 4 years. Kathleen is the co-founder of the nonprofit Heart of a Warrior Woman, a group geared towards educating and inspiring moms of children with substance use disorder. She runs Moms for All Pathways to Recovery from Addiction, which is not a support group but an education resource group based on evidence-based practices. She also finds time to help volunteer other parents whose children use drugs or alcohol problematically by working as a certified parent coach in craft from the Partnership to End Addiction. But she tells us her favorite job is being an admin for TAM California chapter, where she finds her own personal support in this long and winding road. Well, welcome, Kathleen. We are so glad to have you and grateful that you are giving us your time tonight. If you're ready, let's go ahead and get started talking about harm reduction, what it means, and how it could help in our journey. And with that, I'm going to give it over to the beautiful Kathleen.
Thank you, Beverly. Well, hello, everybody. I am just so honored to be here tonight. As Bev said, I found TAM probably maybe a year after it started when I read an article about Barbara in a newspaper. Oops, sorry. Now I am an admin in California. I love being in California. I love the TAM chapter there. And it's a place where I really feel really safe to share my own story, my own struggles. And so I just want to give a shout out. So I prepared a little PowerPoint. Hopefully I'm going to be able to share my screen. I'm not very technically inclined, but hopefully Beverly is going to help me through that. And, I'm not really sure exactly how familiar everybody is with harm reduction. So I have a little PowerPoint that just sort of goes through the principles and philosophies and some of the programming. And then afterwards, I'd like to share a little bit about my story and how harm reduction has come into my life, and I believe has saved my daughter. So without further ado, I'm going to try to share my screen here. Everybody see that?
Yes, we see it. Perfect.
Okay, great. So I love this quote. Every mother whose child uses drugs is just a harm reductionist waiting to find the right person to train her. That really resonates with me because really we're mothers and we've been trying to keep our children out of harm since they were, born. So when we think about harm reduction, we can think about some examples that are just right here, right now, always. Things as silly as sunscreen or seat belts or speed limits or even birth control. Now, harm reduction is really making the news with COVID-19, and harm reduction practices look like masks and washing your hands and staying safe. So I thought I'd talk briefly about some of the principles of harm reduction. So I think the most important thing for people to realize is that people that are working in the harm reduction field, which I do not, I'm not an expert in harm reduction, I'm just an advocate for it. Harm reduction does not attempt to minimize or ignore the absolute tragic harm and dangers that come with illicit drug use. And harm reduction understands that drug use is really complex, and it's from severe use all the way to abstinence. I don't think people realize that abstinence is also a part of harm reduction. Harm reduction is really a non-judgmental approach that meets people where they are at, but I want to emphasize that it doesn't leave them there. Harm reduction treats all individuals with dignity, compassion, and respect, and uses really evidence-based policy and practices, and accepts that behavior is an incremental process. You know, the change process is really, really hard. Forget about being in active addiction, just for any of us. And so it accepts that, you know, any little tiny change, any little foot forward is positive. It also empowers the individual, the person that is using drugs, that they're responsible for reducing harms related to their use. So what are some examples of harm reduction programs? People are probably familiar with needle distribution recovery programs or syringe services. They distribute sterile needles and collect used ones, and they also provide information on a variety of services, prescribed medications that are legal, methadone, Suboxone, or Vivitrol, naloxone. They provide outreach and education services that contact people who use substances to encourage safer behavior. Peer support programs that are group run and attended by people that are using substances. And this helps to really address some gaps in services. And then also, you know, even when you think about, you know, alcohol use, you know, all the campaigns to create awareness of risks while driving under the influence of alcohol or other substances, legal or illegal. And then supervised consumption facilities, which I'm not going to spend any time on because they are not legal in the United States. So overdose prevention is really kind of at the core of all of it. You know, you can't recover if you're not living. And so, you know, this sort of concept provides education for families and friends about the risks of overdose. So, you know, that's naloxone, fentanyl testing strips. I think everybody is pretty aware that, you know, there really isn't even heroin out there anymore. It's all synthetic, man-made poison. And so most of the overdose deaths that are occurring now really are, people don't even know what's in their drugs. And it's not just heroin, it's methamphetamines, it's benzos. You know, fentanyl is really being put into almost every drug, and people don't realize how strong it is when they take it. So I wrote down a couple myths about harm reduction, but certainly if you have any you know, things that you're thinking about that you believe to be true, please put them up in the chat box and we can talk about them. But you know, one of the things is, you know, does harm reduction make it easier for people to continue to use and prevent them from quitting? It took me a long time to really realize that nobody has the power to stop someone from using drugs if they want to use drugs. And so, you know, just that fundamental truth I think is important. And, you know, the thing that it really does is it reduces risks, all the risks that are involved, you know, particularly hepatitis and HIV. You know, the other myth I hear a lot is, you know, do the syringe programs, you know, enable drug users by making it safer? Well, studies just don't confirm that at all. In fact, they're really effective at reducing rates of HIV and Hep C. And even the Surgeon General has made up an official, position that there is no relationship between syringe programs and increased drug use. Medications for OUD, opiate use disorder, just trading one drug for another. Well, I mean, I can't believe how many times I hear in, all of the support groups that I belong to that people just really, really still believe this. But the evidence is really clear that patients receiving medication for opiate addiction just generally do better than those that aren't. And, it's a staggering statistic. There's lots of research about this, but, at least 50%, cutting the risk of overdose deaths by at least 50%. And does harm reduction drain funding from treatment programs? No, because treatment programs are a part of harm reduction. And many HR activities are cost effective and prevent costly outcomes. People with drug addictions should have access to mainstream health services like everybody else. It is a public health issue. Some do, but only when it's really too late. They're in the ER, but they will seek relationships and information from people that they trust. And a lot of those people are working with our kids that are on the streets, where they feel really more accepted and respected. I just wanted to touch on, language, because it is a part of harm reduction and reducing stigma. And, some of this may be new to you, some may not, but, the words abuse, abuser, and addict, are really frowned upon, at least by us. I know a lot of our kids identify as being an addict, but that's okay because they can call themselves whatever they want. But, the word abuse is really associated with violence. And so it really doesn't address this disorder as a health issue, and it kind of puts the blame on the person with the addiction. I mean, you wouldn't call a person a diabetic, so why would you call them an addict? So it's recommended that we try to use, person first language to show the value of the person and not to define them by their disorder. So instead, we should try to say things like, he uses drugs problematically, or she had an opiate use disorder. This is probably new to a lot of people. The language thing changes as we learn more things, but medication replacement or medication assisted treatment, MAT, is now becoming a bit frowned upon. And so, I think the reason behind it is that we don't use those type of words to describe other health conditions. We don't call the diabetes medication insulin, or an inhaler for asthma medication assisted treatment. So why would we hold opioid addiction to such a different standard? So instead, it's recommended that we say, that she's taking medication for her opiate use disorder. And the new acronym now is MOUD, which stands for Medications for Opioid Use Disorder. And when we can, let's just call it by its name. She's on methadone. Same thing with saying clean. An example might be she did drugs for many years, but she's now clean. Well, it associates the illness with filth, dirty being the opposite. And it really implies a person struggling with a dependence on drugs or alcohol is unacceptable. So, the same goes for when you're talking about a drug test, when we say a clean test or a dirty test. Why not instead just say she no longer uses drugs, or, his or her test result was negative. you know, just some thoughts about kind of trying to put together harm reduction and parenting, are, I think the thing that, that I've really learned is that, people use drugs for a reason. And I would encourage, parents that are, in communication with their children to really begin to explore, what is the relationship that your child has with their drug. You might ask questions like, how do you feel when you're taking this drug? Anything to open up the conversation so that you can begin some mutual exploration. And then, really meeting them where they're at, requires us to really put aside our own thoughts and fears and listen, because listening encourages an open and honest dialogue. And remember, we can't enable drug use. And meeting people where they're at and making, small positive, changes, is really opposed to the sort of tough love and let them hit bottom approach. Bottom now is often death. I encourage, people that I talk to really look for any small positive incremental change, and to really reinforce any positive behaviors. Harm reduction succeeds where tough love fails, in part is, because we can come at it from a compassion and flexibility standpoint. And evidence-based therapies inform harm reduction and encourage us to have, be open to different options. I think we can all agree that there just is no one and only way. And, everyone's doing the best they can. So, let's be kind and gentle with ourselves. And, sometimes I know it seems like our kids love, their drugs more than they love us, but, that's just not true. And, we can't solve the problem, but we can certainly try to make it better. And for change to be successful for our children, then I think we have to be open to change too. So that is my PowerPoint. Now, if I can just figure out how to get rid of it.
You got this.
All right, hang on.
You're good. While you're doing, there you go.
There we go.
While you're doing that, we want to just give you, Miss Kathleen, a great big thank you very much for all of your insight, tips, and advice. We certainly don't need to tell you how much it means to hear this as well, but it does give us the extra encouragement we need and want. Thank you again for your time and wisdom. We appreciate you so much.
Oh, thank you. Well, I wanted to share a little bit about my personal story to sort of, help put things in perspective.
As you're doing that, ladies, go ahead and put your questions over in the chat bubble. If you want to ask a question, we will be taking a few questions right after Miss Kathleen is done. Go ahead, Miss Kathleen. Sorry about that.
Thank you. So, my daughter had a very, very serious fentanyl addiction. And we've been circling in and out of rehabs, 20 to be exact. And about 5 years ago, I just started to try to be open to other options and started looking at evidence-based, treatments. And I stumbled onto actually, TAM's subgroup, which is the MAT harm reduction group. And, there I found, just amazing, incredible support from other mothers that had had their kids on medications, and the two admins, well, there's a few admins there, but Vivian and Teresa were just completely life-saving to me. Thank you if you're on. Thank you so much. And I started to explore putting my daughter on medication. And so we started off putting her on Suboxone. I really didn't know at the time that she was prescribed about 16 milligrams, and it just wasn't enough. As I said, she, had a severe addiction to a pretty strong opioid. And so, we made a good attempt for about a year, and then I was in Montana, and I took another job to come back to California where my family is. And so on the way down, we dropped my daughter off at a sober living in Utah that she'd been to before with her Suboxone, and she really wanted to make a go, and she'd done pretty well for almost a year, and so we dropped her off. So she was there for just a few days. The sober living, unfortunately, was not very good about making sure that, she was taking her medication as prescribed. And so needless to say, I got the call my first day at work that she had actually walked out of her sober living. And so, I spent that day talking to her counselor and getting the whole runaround about, I needed to, just stay tough, and she was going to come back. And so, fortunately, I know many of our children sell their phones. So for whatever reason, my daughter never did, which was really a blessing, because I could find her and at least text with her, if not talk with her. And so, finally I was able to get a hold of her, and she told me that, Mom, it's really okay. I've been, I've been really trying, and I can't seem to do it. And I'm just going to go be with my people. There's a park here in Salt Lake, and there's a bunch of my people there, and I'm just going to go and live there. And, I love you, and, don't worry about me. And that was the end of our conversation. And so I really knew right then that was what she was going to do, that she was just, she'd been so beaten down after so many unsuccessful attempts at rehab. And then she tried this medication, and that didn't work. And so she was just, just at a realization where nothing is going to work, and I'm just going to go be with my people. So I actually had just started my job, so I couldn't really, just leave like we all do immediately when, there's a problem. But I called my two sons, one living in Texas, one in California, and asked if they would, be willing to get on a plane and go to Utah to be with their sister, while my husband from California drove up. And so, without question, they both jumped on an airplane. They met together at the airport. They drove to the park. I rented them a hotel right across the street, and they stayed with their sister. They slept with her in the park until my husband was able to get there. So, they were not able to get her to come to the hotel. They tried to talk to her about, coming back to California. She was just not willing to do that. And my husband called me, just in tears. She's just not going to come back. She just wants to do drugs. And so, out of my mouth came, well, please give her the money to give her so she can buy her drugs. Because we need to get her back to California, because I wanted her to try methadone. I'd done more research and really understood the medications much better. And I really felt like that was just going to be a great medication for her that might really work. And so, that's what we did. We gave her money and said, look, we're going to get you drugs. give you money to get drugs, but you have to come to the hotel. And so that worked. And then I sent my sons to the pharmacy to get Narcan and to get all the equipment that Molly needed to be able to use her drug. She's an IV user. So I gave them a list of all the equipment that they needed to buy her. And they got Narcan. And so, she came to the hotel and used in the hotel bathroom, and they stood right outside. And so we did that all the way home to California. And that, she didn't have to worry about being in pain or suffering. And then we were able to get her, into the methadone clinic. I know that sounds crazy. Like, I know that a lot of you are probably like, wow. I kind of think back about it and I think, wow, too, because, it was a really hard decision to make, because I felt like I was, encouraging her drug use, but, she wasn't going to come back otherwise. And I didn't want her to be in pain. When I really started to shift my thinking and trying to understand her disorder, then I became a lot more compassionate, and I didn't want her to suffer. And so, the good news is that she started her methadone program. She still had to use until she was stabilized, but once she was stabilized, then, she's never used an opioid again. And that was 4 years ago. So I'm super blessed, super thankful that there's medications to help. Is it perfect? No. But, she's alive, and, she's going to be a mom in about 30 days. I never thought I'd ever see that. So I'm really grateful. I'm really grateful. So that's my story, and I'm happy to answer any questions or, just talk more about what people think or, any myths people got going on out there. I'm open.
All right, Miss Kathleen, we do have a few questions. And if you do have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat bubble and we'll call you in order. Miss Michelle wanted to know, how do you make the initial approach of offering help when they deny the problem?
Yeah, it's the old elephant in the room syndrome. What I do is, my daughter, prefers, she's not really good at face-to-face confrontation or even verbal confrontation. So I prefer texting her. But what I do is I take the approach of just stating the facts. So I might say to her something like, when you came in last night, I could hear you fumbling around and talking to yourself and making a lot of noise. And, it really reminded me of when you had a problem with methamphetamines, and I'm worried and I love you. And then I just leave it at that. And I would say that 9 times out of 10, after a little bit of thought, because I'm not confronting her with anything other than just the facts as I saw them, 9 times out of 10, she would say, yeah, Mom, I did. I took some meth and I'm so sorry. And, and then we open up a conversation. I don't know if that answered your question, but,
Yeah,
I just tend to state the facts, not put any emotion or judgment towards it, always say that I'm worried, and then I always end my conversation with, I love you.
perfect. Thank you. Miss Sue wanted to know, how old was your daughter when you brought her back to California?
She was 25. She is 29 years old now.
Thank you. And Miss Donna would like to know, has your daughter remained on methadone for all this time, or do they eventually wean them off? She's not sure how the medication works. Thank you.
Yes, my daughter is still on methadone. Some people have to be on it for life. And so I don't really ever judge that, although I would say that most doctors say anywhere from 3 to 5 years. It does take, about 8 to 12 months to taper off of the medication successfully. My daughter was actually beginning her taper. So she started at about 165 milligrams of methadone. And she was down to about 80 when she found out she was pregnant. And so, they don't recommend that you taper any further. In fact, she had to go up because the baby takes some of the methadone. She had to go up 20 milligrams just to sort of stabilize herself. But for her, her goal is to taper down low enough to jump to Suboxone, and then stabilize on Suboxone for a little while, and then see how she feels from there.
Thank you very much. Miss Joanna would like to know, have you ever heard of naltrexone to prevent opioid relapse, or do you know if it's effective?
That's also known as Vivitrol. I'm not a doctor, so I can only just tell you, what I've read in many research papers. I think Vivitrol is a good medication for alcohol use disorder. It's been very successful with many people. I don't think it's the best medication for opioid use disorder unless somebody is highly motivated to not use drugs. Buprenorphine and methadone have shown, way more success. But there is, and this will also be in my resource list, there are 12-step programs for people that are in active use. And so those are from an organization called Harm Reduction Works. And so they have meetings almost every day. They're virtual. They usually have a speaker. They feel like a 12-step meeting because they have, principles, but they accept people no matter where they are. So that you could find people, in recovery there, or you could find people that are still using drugs problematically.
All right. Miss Kathleen, again, we thank you for your presentation
Thank
tonight and
you.
your insight and all of your help. And we look forward to seeing you more in town.
Well, I'll be sharing baby pictures soon. So
good. Have a blessed evening, Kathleen. Thank you so
okay.
much from all
All
of
right.
us.
Thanks, everybody.